I want to welcome everybody to the webinar. Today, we're going to look at a paradigm shift in education. Um, and one is that's starting to occur in some places already. And what's driving it are the factors that we all are hearing so much about for everyone involved in education. Student achievement has declined on the averages in many places for the first time in decades. That's the national statistics anyway. And I know that other specific areas of the country are struggling with that. Teachers are stressed. Teachers are overwhelmed. Teachers are leaving the profession in record numbers. At the policy level, most of the discussion about education is about school choice and about teaching methodology. And I think many of us are a bit puzzled at how those approaches are really going to do much to alleviate the burden on teachers or raise student test scores in a truly meaningful way. So what we're going to do today, first of all, we are recording it. Those of you who are participating via Zoom will automatically get a link to the recording when it's ready. And those of you who are on LinkedIn, it gets recorded on LinkedIn as I understand things. And so it'll be there for anybody who wants to see it. The QR code on this slide is a link to the slides that I'm using today. So you can simply scan it and download a copy for your reference and for note-taking or whatever. So now let's just jump right in. So the current paradigm, which has teachers having a predominant responsibility in the learning and teaching equation, reflects neither what we know about how learning takes place, nor how student achievement levels can actually be significantly improved in a really quick way, or in a quicker way than what we've been seeing. So what we're going to do today is recognize that the current situation is not tenable. We cannot thrive economically as a nation with only about a third of our students performing proficiently at grade level. I learned recently that when Social Security came into being, there were 160 workers for every person collecting Social Security benefits. Today, there are 2.9, 160 down to 2.9. So that means that 3 workers today have to be contributing assuming the system doesn't change, for every worker that is, or previous worker, or retired worker, or who has previously contributed to the system. I worry a lot for my children and for my grandchildren. We continue to hear daily about the academic fallout from the pandemic, and the solutions that are offered are essentially to provide more teaching. It might be in the form of high intensity tutoring. It might be data informed instruction, but nonetheless, what it is more on the backs and the shoulders of teachers. And what we hear from educators, of course, is that we can't keep putting the whole burden for raising student performance on their backs, on our backs. We hear the concerns that teachers are pushed to teach the test in order to try to meet the pass rates that are measured. And that focuses on content rather even than the skills that students are going to be needing when they join the workforce in a few years. And it just takes too long. We've seen some districts in some states, excuse me, start to make gains recently, but they're very incremental. Those improvements in performance are small, and it's going to take 5 or 6 years even to get back to the place that we were before the pandemic. And that was not much better. I mean, obviously not much better, but also not, we still had only maybe 40% of students performing adequately. It just wasn't good. So what we're going to focus today on a paradigm shift that doesn't just keep putting more on the backs of teachers. It isn't about teaching to the test. It is about the skills that are so desperately needed in the workforce. And paradigm that can have a remarkably surprising impact on student performance within a single school year. So just for a little background on me, for those of you who don't know me, I started my teaching career in the 1970s, and I have taught at virtually every level of education. I raised 3 boys, all of whom learned differently, and I have trained thousands and thousands of parents and teachers and other educators on the neuroscience of learning. I coined the term neuroeducator to apply to educators like me, and there are others. In fact, my colleague is on the webinar with me today, who have sought out resources about how learning happens and how neuroscience research can actually inform and help. And we went out looking for this because we recognize the gaps in our teacher training. We recognize that we just couldn't help our students as much as they needed with the resources and skills that we had. So I spent the last 20 plus years studying and sharing the implications of neuroscience research for learning and teaching. In that time, my colleagues and I have changed the experience of learning for thousands and thousands of students and transformed many, many lives. And that is a great source of joy and satisfaction. And every time we hear from a student or a parent or a teacher or a principal about how kids' lives have been changed, that's frankly why we get up and do what we do every day and are so committed to this effort. Recently, my colleague and I, Roger Stark and I, collected our experiences into a book called Child Differently, Now What? Well, it was written specifically for parents. It's also received a lot of warm welcome from educators. And at the end of today's session, I'm going to be giving out some free signed copies. So stay tuned and we'll come back to that. There are 3 core concepts that we need to explore as part of our journey today. And in fact, this webinar is as much about dispelling misconceptions as it is about sharing what works. Because if we continue to believe that some of the myths and misconceptions that have been part of education for, well, just about forever, it's going to be a real big challenge to shift the paradigm. So as we delve into the first concept, I'm going to give everybody a chance to respond to a quick poll here. And here is my polls. And we're going to launch the poll. Okay, so if you are on Zoom, please click on your choice. And for those of you, I don't know if you can actually see the poll on my screen. If you're on LinkedIn, we're going to have to figure that out one of these days. But if not, just maybe you can type in the comments or whatever. So if you had to choose something that is a big predictor, the main predictor in your experience of student performance, would you choose class size, teacher quality, student capacity, family support, learning styles, or learning environment? Or something else? If you have another idea, something else that you think would be more important, please share that in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. Looks like we've had a number of, no, people are still voting. I'm going to give it a minute. And again, if you're on LinkedIn, just, type your thoughts. We've had just about everybody. We've had most of the people who were online in the Zoom meeting respond. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. I think pretty much everybody's responded who's going to. And I'm going to share the results. So nobody said class size. 5% said teacher quality. 18% said student capacity, 14% said family support, 41% said learning styles, and 23% said learning environment. So that's very consistent with the kind of experience. Usually I'll have somebody say class size, and usually have more people say teacher quality. But nonetheless, that's pretty reflective of what I typically hear when I ask that question. So I'm going to close that. And what I'm going to do now is to say that of all of those factors, the one factor that is the most predictive of students' academic outcomes is their cognitive skills, which is another way of saying student capacity for learning. So again, this is something that is not broadly understood. Even those of you who took the time today and are probably more knowledgeable maybe about some of neuroscience things, nonetheless, this gets by us a lot. And we assume that factors that have to do with the environment and with teachers and things like that account for that, but the greater part of academic outcomes, but in fact, it is cognitive skills. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with this as others, what are cognitive skills? This is a chart that we use to show that. And cognitive skills are the how of learning. We can also think about them as the infrastructure for learning. Schools focus on the what of learning, on the content in general, reading, writing, math, science, the rest of the curriculum. So it's knowledge and content and skills that have to do with those disciplines. Cognitive skills are how learning takes place. They're the mental processes that our brains use to take in, store, retrieve, understand, apply, problem solve with information from the outside world. And at the foundational level, we have skills like attention and visual processing, auditory processing, processing speed. And then at the next tier up on this chart, we have a very special group of cognitive skills called executive functions. And executive functions are among the most predictive of these cognitive skills, very predictive of everything on this chart above it, including academic outcomes, but also including everything at the very top level of this chart. How far a student is likely to get academically, their ability to get a good paying job that is going to support them and their family, and whether or not they're going to be healthy and contributing members of society. So all of this, it comes from and is based on and is predicted by these cognitive skills, this learning infrastructure. So if you have two students sitting next to each other, what this means is that, and the one's getting A's and one's getting D's, it means that 50% of that difference can be accounted for by those students' cognitive skills. And if you're saying to yourself, as you might be, well, what would I do about that since I don't really know much about my students' capacity or my students' cognitive skills? The reason is that the education system spends less than 5% of its resources on cognitive factors. 75% is spent on traditional academic resources and systems. A little bit more today on social and emotional factors and resources. So what I want to do now is take a little look at what we could know about our students that would help us, that would actually make a tremendous difference in our understanding of the how of learning. This is data from an elementary school in Indiana, where the fourth graders took an assessment called MindPrint. MindPrint assesses 10 cognitive skills that you see across the x-axis. The first 3 are executive functions. Then you see visual and verbal memory. Then you see some reasoning skills, different types of thinking and reasoning. And then you see processing and an overall average. So on average, when this is not this immediate last fall, but the fall before that, the school year before that, these students on average they had attention skills at the 17th percentile. This is not a special school. This is a regular, everyday public school that has a variety of different kinds of students in it. But nonetheless, uh, skills in attention, skills in working memory, skills in flexible thinking that are significantly below what would be expected in the national norms. You can see visual memory at the 15th percentile. And yes, verbal memory at the 1st percentile. So that means that the students in these 4th grade classrooms had the ability to hold on and remember language-based information. So they are remembering what they see and what they hear less capably than 99% of the population. Now, that sounds kind of crazy, and it is in some ways, but there are a couple things I need to say here. One of which is that there has been a significant decline since the pandemic in some of these cognitive skills, especially flexible thinking and memory skills. And so while this is maybe a little bit extreme, it truly is a regular, everyday public school, not extremely high poverty, but what we're seeing across the board in many, many schools is this significant decline in verbal memory. So if you think about this, think about these 64 students in 3 classrooms who are scoring at the 15th percentile for visual memory and the 1st percentile for verbal memory. What does that suggest to you? What does that probably look like in the classroom? And I'm going to go look at the chat and see. Okay, see a quick question about the valid age range for Mindprint. It's 8 and up, and it can be used for college students as well as adults. The reason that the areas declined is something we honestly don't know yet. I've heard lots of speculation from various sources about what it is, but there's clearly something that was going on in the environment of remote learning that resulted, and the impact was the strongest for younger children, the strongest for kids who are getting special ed services, and the strongest for low socioeconomic status kids. So that we do know. And there's something about the experience of trying to, start school and go to school in a situation of remote learning that seems to have been quite detrimental to students' ability to remember, what they're hearing and seeing. So we hear from a lot of times from teachers that students maybe aren't remembering what they hear. We talked about that yesterday. Don't you remember that? Or things like it may seem to teachers like information's going in one ear and out the other and is not sticking. And that is, in fact, it's just something that is much more challenging for kids. A lot of kids, not every kid. Obviously, there are children still who are performing at the very highest percentiles for these skills, but on average, children and our students are struggling with this much more. And if it seems like kids have things going in one ear and out the other, it's not your imagination. So what are we going to do? Are we going to do what we often do? Say, well, you know what? That's what it means to be a teacher. Somehow they'll just have to figure it out and figure out how to catch them up and work around their learning struggles. Maybe with this data, they can differentiate more, but when you have 60 to 70% of a classroom, of the students in your classroom who are struggling because of weaknesses in learning skills, how can you differentiate to that degree? It's not a realistic proposition, as I'm sure most teachers, if not all, would suggest. Maybe we can use that strategy that was suggested and some people have claimed was helpful following the pandemic, and that was high-intensity tutoring. Maybe we could provide high-intensity tutoring. But is that feasible? If you're a principal or a another administrator, if you considered the proposition of providing high-intensity tutoring for most of your students, that may it's mostly not a very realistic proposition. Are we going to give more students IEPs? I don't think so. I don't know how we could possibly do much more of that. Do we accept lower academic performance and test scores? None of these are very appealing. So maybe what we need to do is to ask a very different question. We need to ask the question if cognitive skills can be improved. And, oh, right. So the second core concept that we're going to tackle today is the fact that intelligence is not fixed. If you say, well, I know, then that's great, but then what do we do? But in fact, if I did a poll on this, which I didn't do today, but there are lots of polls out there, and we've polled people many times, and people continue to have a deeply held belief, especially in the United States, frankly, that we're pretty much born with all the intelligence we're ever going to have, and that there isn't much we can do about it. This misconception is part of the paradigm in which we put the burden predominantly on the teacher and not on the student. And think for a moment about intelligence and what you've learned or studied or heard about intelligence, and why we have this misconception, or many people do, that it's something we can't do much about. One of the reasons I think that this has become so sort of just built into our attitudes and belief system is this gentleman here, who's you may recognize as Alfred Binet, although it would be entirely wrong to blame him. So Binet, as you may know, developed one of the early tests that have now come to be known as IQ tests. But that test, which was called the Simon-Binet, had really nothing to do with measuring intelligence, at least as we think about it today. The goal was simply to help the French educational system, identify students that were having some additional struggles and might need to be taken out or get some supplemental support from their standard classroom. So it was simply a gross but very important mechanism for instructional support. The idea of testing for intelligence is another proposition, and it assumes a couple of things. First, it assumes that intelligence is one thing, and it also assumes that it can be measured. Or that is certainly the implication of what the belief system is that has been so predominant and that keeps us in the old paradigm. And so when scientists, for example, or for researchers or psychometricians or test developers are developing an IQ test, one of the key questions that comes up is it reliable? So it's a big consideration for an IQ test because you want it to be reliably predict someone's IQ. But what that means is that someone should always get about the same score every time you take the test. But if intelligence can change, if it's not a single thing and you're not stuck in it, then you can't have a reliable test because you don't know the underlying thing that you're trying to test can in fact change. So the implication, though, is that, we were sort of stuck with it and there wasn't much you could do about it. And what if intelligence wasn't just one thing? In fact, there are lots of different theories of intelligence. And some people believe that, some of the original conceptions about intelligence were that it was one thing, that people were smart or not so smart and maybe on a spectrum, but it was pretty much one thing, and sometimes referred to as G, or general intelligence. There's some researchers who have divided intelligence into two things: fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. So a couple of different things. Fluid intelligence means you're ability to learn and reason. Crystallized means what you have learned, what you know. There's a theory called PASS uh, that has four things contributing to intelligence: planning, attention, simultaneous, and sequential processing. You've heard about multiple intelligences and the idea that it's many things. And in fact, when we start to think now about all of these different cognitive processes that are important parts of how learning takes place, and the research that's been done more recently about the general connectivity across the brain and its relationship to intelligence, we start to adopt a view that it's probably more than one thing, and um, and certainly has to do with uh, something that is influenced not just by genetics. So my goal here is not to come up with authoritative definition of intelligence. That's way beyond my pay grade. And it's a concept, obviously, that has been uh, debated and has been defined in different ways over the years. But I do want to emphasize this trend in the direction of, excuse me, of considering intelligence as multiple things. So the students were assessed 17 weeks apart with a cognitive test called the COGAT. It's a reliable cognitive test. The student scores would be expected to be very similar between test one and test two. Some might go up a little bit, some might go down a little bit, but in general, the scores should be just about the same. In this case, they were not. They went up significantly. On average, 11 points in verbal reasoning, 10 points in nonverbal, 14 points for the composite. That's the overall assessment of cognitive capability or intelligence. And in fact, not only was the magnitude of the average increase remarkable, the vast majority of students increased. So instead of some going up and some going down, in fact, with this, 92% of the students improved their verbal score. Quantitative and composite scores were 77%. And, or rather, the 77% was a nonverbal, but 92% on all those other measures. So cognitive skills and intelligence can actually change. And in fact, they can change to a far greater degree than most people realize, and in a way that is sustainable, that translates into better academic performance and better behavior and lower levels of stress and anxiety within a semester and at virtually any age. I want to share with you now one student. So you can, as we talk about this student, you probably can have in your mind an example of someone that you know that might fit this kind of description. So this is a student who, this is his mind print report and his assessment. And we can see that he has really strong working memory and spatial perception. He probably is a whiz with Legos and things like that. He's got excellent verbal memory. So very good at remembering what he reads and hears. But he has some reasons that he's probably not doing as well in school and not able to demonstrate how capable and smart he really is. He struggles with attention and processing speed, flexible attention, and his visual memory is very weak. So that's a great example of a kid who isn't succeeding in school and probably described by his teachers as lazy, underachieving, maybe unmotivated. But how motivated would you be if it took a lot of effort for you to sustain your attention, to remember anything the teacher puts on the board, to adapt when things change, and oh, by the way, it also takes you longer to process what's going on in class. And JA, student's initials, started his cognitive training program. The problem involved working in Brainware Safari, the cognitive training software, for 45 minutes, 3 times a week for 12 weeks. This is just, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the main home screen for Brainware Safari. It's clinical therapy, basically embedded in a video game format. I'm not going to do this as a demo today. If you are interested in that, I'm going to, there's some demos on YouTube, and we'll also share with you some ways that you can schedule time to do a demo with us. So, this is JA's scores after he did his cognitive training. So what you see is this tremendous improvement in his cognitive skills across the board. The areas that were real struggles for him are now, many of them, strengths, much stronger overall. And in fact, he's performing very well, very successfully in school. This kind of cognitive growth is truly transformational. And it translates into things like self-confidence. Students who have been through cognitive training with our programs experience significant boosts in their learning ability, their willingness to take on more difficult challenges, their ability to bounce back from setbacks and failures, and even improve motivation towards school and work. And it just makes sense. If the work is easier, we're just more confident we can take it on and that we can succeed. Cognitive gains also have translated into improvements on state standardized test scores. This is an example from a middle school in Indiana, where a selected group of 6th graders or 7th graders used Brainware Safari, used to the cognitive training. And this compares their scores on the state standardized test called iLearn from the time they were 6th graders until the time they were 7th graders. So the year before they did their cognitive training, this is a group that was struggling. Only 10% of these students were performing proficiently in ELA and only 10% in math. The following year, you can see the tremendous change. After their cognitive training, 24% were performing at or above proficiency, and only 29% compared to 65% the previous year were performing in the below average range. You all hopefully are familiar with the concept of below approaching and at or above proficiency in terms of standardized tests in reading and math, and very similar outcomes in math as well. It translates to improved behavior. In this case, it was measured by the number of times that students were late to school and the number of times they were referred to the principal's office. So once we understand those 3 concepts, the cognitive skills are the greatest predictor of academic outcomes, that cognitive skills or intelligence are not fixed, and that they can be developed to a really significant degree. Then we can change the paradigm that says that learning in school relies predominantly on the teacher. We can ask more of students and less of teachers. For students, we want to see them engaged in productive struggle, not being spoon-fed pre-digested content. We want to see them meeting higher expectations because they have the learning capacity to meet those expectations and they have the confidence that they can succeed in challenging learning situations. And that can lead to more independence, more responsibility, more accountability for their own learning. For teachers, it's not just another thing to do. In fact, in a cognitive training program like Brainware Safari, the student should do virtually all the work. The software does not, rather, the software itself does the actual training, and a teacher or even a teacher's aide can learn to coach the students at the program, since that's really what that role is, and they can learn that very quickly. What teachers then have is a room full of students better prepared to learn and easier to teach. And when students' strengths become even stronger and they develop that learning capacity, teaching becomes easier and, frankly, a lot more fun. I tried to think of an analogy for this paradigm shift, and maybe one of you can suggest a better one. But as I thought about the impact of the pandemic, especially on student cognitive skills, the image that came to mind was a car leaking oil. That's what came to my mind. So a student's brain that has difficulty holding on to and remembering information seemed a little like a car engine to me that leaks oil. And what do we do when we have a car that leaks oil? We can either fix it, or we can hold on to that so that it can, retain the oil inside the engine, or we can continue to add quart after quart of oil and keep trying to fill it up. So without this paradigm shift, we will likely have teachers continue to labor away, pouring more and more oil into the leaking engines of their students' brains. And I don't think we do that with our cars, and I certainly don't think we should be doing it with our children. If you're a school and you want to explore this approach to changing the paradigm, I encourage you to schedule a demo or discussion with me. You can do that in a number of different ways. There's a link here, or you can just email me, bhill@mybrainware.com. If you're thinking about who should participate in this discussion, generally we find it helpful to include somebody who has responsibility for curriculum and instruction and learning at the district level, at the school level, principals, assistant principals, potentially even a teacher leader. But you can also talk about that some more as we plan that online demo. So finally, I want to give away some books. You can just scan the QR code with your phone and fill out a short form so that we have the info that we would need to send you a book. And while you're doing that, I'd like to take questions, and I'm going to check the chat window to see if we have any more questions, and hope you'll just take a minute to add them either to the, you can add them in the Q&A also, I believe. I should bring that up. I don't see anything there, so I won't spend any more time on that. I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay, question about the software platform. So Brainware Safari generally is recommended for ages 6 and up. The only content knowledge that students have to have is to know the alphabet and their numbers to 100. And most of it is nonverbal, non-reading. The instructions, you can listen to them as well as reading them. So there are lots of other options. And so, 6-year-olds, younger students will probably need a little bit more one-on-one support from the teacher or the coach. But it has been used with many kids that age and up. Time per session with the sophomore, and how many total times per individual. So if we have students use the program 3 to 5 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes for 12 to 14 weeks, we are very confident we're going to see significant cognitive growth. That doesn't mean that they have maxed out, or that they have completed the program and they can continue to use it, but that's the kind of use. So if you're thinking about it in a school situation, it's sometimes done within a semester. Sometimes they go longer than that. But as we talked earlier, what we can expect is some significant impact within a school year and even within a semester. And Becky, well, you were asked about can be a single child. Yes, absolutely. We work with families all the time. Okay. Well, someone did ask about the difference between capacity and ability. And generally, we draw this distinction. Everybody has the ability to learn. It's what our brains were designed to do. But not everybody has the same developed capacity in terms of all of these learning processes. And so everybody has that ability, and everybody can develop their capacity for learning to a much greater degree. So that's how the distinction that we draw.
Yeah, I like to say that the big thing is those things, your environment, genetics, and life experience shape who you are. And historically, everybody kind of thought that's what it was. Some kids were bright, some kids were stupid, some kids talked too much, some kids didn't pay attention. But that's not the case. The reality is each individual, all of us, are the CEO of U Inc. And if we want different, we can have different, but we got to do differently. Because if you have a child that learns differently, a parent has no idea how to empower that child to step into their best selves, to be a solid academic performer and behave appropriately. And all schools have to offer, if a child learns differently, is a 504 and an IEP plan. And all those plans are designed to do is to work around the underlying challenges that are creating the hurdles for that child to try to learn and behave properly. Because we believe this: God did not make any junk, and there's a special person inside every little person just trying to step into their best selves. And that's exactly what we can do. We can provide an individual that learns differently based on everything we've been able to see in 73 countries, all 50 states, working with 250,000 people around the world, that we can provide a child with the absolute best opportunity to step into their best selves. The reason that is, I'd like to say, it's this comprehensive integrated architecture that we use. We work on over 43 cognitive skills simultaneously. And that's what's really the dynamic difference in what we do than anybody else. It's this comprehensive integrated architecture that we use to build cognitive infrastructure that drives such enormous growth and sustainability and transfer in such a short period of time. And the reason that is the brain is a highly comprehensive, integrated systemic organ. And if you're going to have any substantial physiological change in the brain with sustainability and transfer, you've got to work the brain the way the brain was built to work. And at 43 cognitive skills, no one in the world remotely comes that close.
Thanks, Roger. That was great. And I had planned this for 45 minutes, and we're now at 48 minutes. And so if there are some more questions, I'm going to go check the chat again to see if there's a couple. I'm still struggling.
If anyone has any questions.
Okay, so there's a comment about from a university professor. I've worked with middle and high schools for over 2 decades. I'm still struggling with how to be more effective in my classroom. High school preparation is at an all-time poor, not ready for college. I hear that a lot. And I think that, we can talk about all kinds of things, but it's certainly not too late in college either, high school for that matter, college, or even as adults. These cognitive skills can be developed. We actually did some research with a junior college or a community college where the students did brainware, and we saw Actually, that was a specific IQ measure using an adult intelligence assessment, and so those can be improved. But the important thing is that whatever level it is, whether it's third grade or sixth grade or ninth grade or freshman in high school, or frankly, getting your first job, the kinds of skills that are needed to learn anything are the same, and we can help develop those skills as we said, to a far greater degree than most people have any idea.
Yeah, Betsy, somebody asked a question about was the program exciting enough to maintain a student's interest? That's never been our problem. What we do is absolutely nothing like school. Absolutely nothing like school. It's gamified, it's fun, it's interactive, it's engaging. We've never had any resistance in that area at this point in time.
No, certainly not. In fact, I heard from a fourth grade teacher in the last week or so that they had on one of those really cold days where they couldn't let the kids go out for recess. They stayed in to do indoor activities, and the majority of the kids opted to do brainware safari during that
During their free time.
time period in their free time. Dear John says he's 82, did the games that it improved me. And it's a big smiley face. So
I'm not 82, but I use them all the time. It's definitely will keep you sharper. There's no doubt about that. But this is really about tapping into the latent learning potential of the student. We spend all of our time, as Betsy said, focusing on the professionalism and developing the competencies of our educators, which is a good thing, But wow, what we're going to do to a classroom full of students better prepared to learn? What does that do to teacher proficiency levels? That's a whole new game changer. And that's what this is all about. Tapping into that latent learning potential of the student, because God did not create any junk. As I said earlier, there's somebody special inside each child, regardless of race, creed, or color, just trying to figure out how they can be the best they can be. And this tool will empower them with that ability to do so.
Angela also had a comment about a concern that adult learners might be less inclined toward the animation.
That may be true. That may be true.
That can be true. It's been used with people of a variety of ages, but there are some, and we do plan to develop alternative graphics down the road, hopefully not too far. It's not too far off.
We're in the middle of alternative graphics right now. Our sweet spot as it relates to schools is between third and ninth grade. That's where we get a lot of receptive people and a lot of success between the third grade and the ninth grade. That's our sweet spot. I'm seeing one person on here. His name is Curtis Balmer. He used to be a speech and language pathologist at a school district. When they decided to mandate brainware safari, they went from one of the lowest performing school districts in the state to the 7th highest academic performing school district in the state.
In fact, I'm going to let maybe Curtis would be kind enough to say a couple of words.
Hey, that'd be a good thing. Let Curtis talk about his experience. And what do we go from 18% to 5% special ed, cut the budget in half? Curtis, are you there?
I am here.
Why don't you talk about your experience? You tricked us about it. Just so you know, this guy tricked us when we first met him. Tell him your story about that, Curtis, why you did that.
So I think probably I'm one of the first folks to work with brainware for Safari on a larger scale. And I saw it online, didn't believe it, said it's too good to be true. But thought it was worth experimenting with, convinced a local, so I worked for a countywide special ed district, convinced a local superintendent in the school I was assigned to try it out, said I would run it if we could get it. And so we did. and I don't remember, I think we had 15 or 20 students in the program I did after school. We copied Brainware Safari's entire protocol. We copied all of their pre-testing, did it exactly the way they did in their study, one of their first studies, and we did all the post-testing. And we ended up with better scores than what they did. It was absolutely phenomenal, made a believer out of us. One of my seventh or eighth grade students at the time, who was in the program, his science teacher actually came down about the 4th week that we were running the program after school and asked me how I was teaching science, because the student had never gotten higher than a C on anything in his classroom, and the kid had aced his first science test ever. And I said, I'm not teaching science, they're playing video games. And he walked in to look, and we asked him, he said, and the student said, well, I didn't change anything. Mr. Bowen slowed down, and I can take notes now, and I know what he's talking about. And I was always trying to catch up before. And I knew that Mr. Bowen hadn't slowed down. And that kid went on to graduate in the top 5 of his class when he graduated high school. And he was in the bottom 3rd when he was in 7th or 8th grade. So yeah, Harbor Beach instituted it at the 3rd grade level, and I want to say at the 7th.
You went district-wide at one point.
And at district-wide, it was 1 point, absolutely. And then we maintained it at 3rd grade and 7th grade, so that they could go back and redo it in 7th grade, just to make sure their skills were there. But yeah, every student went through that program in 3rd grade.
Curtis, thank you so much. And Roger, thank you. And here's our contact information, as well as, any of those links that I shared earlier. Hopefully you downloaded, let me go back to that, page 1. If you wanted to download the slides, again, there's that QR code that you can use to do that. So thank you again so much. Hopefully next time I try to go live on LinkedIn, I will not be anywhere near a virus or a cold. But thanks for joining in, and delightful to see everybody. And hopefully we'll talk soon.